Okay, I'm going to post two videos, one for Chapter 3 and one for Chapter 4 this week. Um, I wanted to say just a couple of things really here about Chapter 3. I think the general concept is fairly straightforward. In our modern system, legislatures rather, excuse me, Congress at the federal level, state legislatures at the state level, California legislature, obviously here in California, are the ones who make laws by passing statutes. Um, Real quickly, the legality principle on slide 2 just holds that to be a crime, there has to be a statute. So we don't have any judge-made law, no presidential or governor decrees, or anything like that. Void for vagueness is what's called a substantive due process issue. So the law, and we'll see here in a couple of cases here in a second, has to be specific to tell you what is or is not against the law. If you don't know, so for example, speeding is the easy example. 65 miles an hour is the speed limit. If the law were don't drive too fast, like what does that mean, right? What's too fast? And the answer, of course, is the sign tells us what's too fast. There's a statute in the vehicle code that actually tells us, school zones, highways, freeways, et cetera, what the speed limit is. So that's void for vagueness. Strict construction just refers to the interpretation of statutes by judges, and either at trial or in the Supreme Court level, meaning they should narrowly interpret statutes. So for example, and this, again, speeding is a decent example of this. In this case, cops do that, right? If you're going 66 and a 65, they could write you a ticket, but usually they do what? They wait till 5 or 10 over, and oftentimes even higher than that, given the nature of drivers in California. The principle there is what? Well, we live in a free society still, right, for the most part. And so, broadly, being very strict legalistic is very tight and very punishing. And we tend to, if we have to lean towards punishment or liberty, we want our cops and our judges to lean towards the liberty function. So that's what it means by strictly construing or strictly interpreting statutes. In terms of the criminal law section here, so on slide 6, we get into like felonies are serious, misdemeanors are minor, and then in California we have things called infractions, which are like tickets. Real quickly here, a couple of things here on the cases. So slide 7 refers to a case called Commonwealth versus Mocon or Mochin. I'm not sure how you pronounce that actually. And this deals with stalking. So in the 50s, you had this idea of a common law idea where judges could make law. That's what common law doesn't, it means law applied commonly, but in terms of how the structure works, it basically allowed judges to make crimes. By the 1950s, that had dropped to basically allowing them to make relatively minor misdemeanor type concessions. So by the 1950s, murder, rape, arson, kidnapping, burglary, all the majors are already in statutes. In Pennsylvania anyway, in the 1950s, you start to see by the 1960s, that's pretty much gone by the wayside. So the Moken case is a case that if it were decided, I think 10 years later, it would be the opposite decision, but it's a good example of sort of the old school way of doing things. So Mochin is harassing people, right? He's making dirty prank phone calls. He's saying awful things. Harassing, of course, means he's doing it over time. There's not a stalking statute in force in the 1950s. Stalking will come later. Statutes have a really hard time writing a stalking statute. And so the Pennsylvania law there says, as you'll see in the opinion in your case book in chapter 3, right, that every offense punishable by the statutes, so that there's a law, or, and I've highlighted the or there, the common law that's not specifically punishable by that act, meaning the penal code, should be punishable as a misdemeanor. That's on page 94. That gives you the statute that the judge is applying. So in this case, this is the 1950s. So right, don't think about the mores of today where people are not very modest and they talk about sexual matters in broad daylight and in open and online and in public and all those kinds of things. This is still the 1950s. Everybody's sort of close to the vest on those things. And so basically this guy is what? He's breach of the peace. He's bothering people. He knows he's bothering people. He's doing it on purpose. So this is not someone who's, inadvertently playing their stereo too loud or their TV too loud in their backyard. I mean, this guy, harassing means intentionally bothering people. So the court says that, the common law there is sufficiently broad for a judge in this case to say, look, dude, you know what you're doing, and you're not going to go to prison. So we're talking about fines and minor jail time. And so anyway, again, this in today's world where we have a specific stalking harassment statutes in pretty much, I'm assuming all 50 states, nowadays you'd have to have a statute. And even in the 50s, if you read the opinion, you can see that even the statute's like, look, if there's a specific law, then go with a specific law. And that's the legality principle. And that nowadays we don't allow any sort of unwritten laws to be applied. They've all got to be written down into statutes. The next case on slide 8 is the Keeler case. Keeler is about a woman who gets pregnant with another man's baby. She's married. Her husband finds out. They get in an argument. And then he chases her down. They get in a car pursuit, basically. He chases her down, kicks her in the stomach, and then kills the baby. The question here is the Penal Code 187 said, as it does now, basically, it is against the law to do an act that causes the death of another human being with premeditation and malice aforethought. And so obviously he kicks his wife in the stomach. He knows she's pregnant, so it's hard to kick a woman in the stomach without knowing that you're intentionally causing harm. Now the question historically would have been, did he know he was going to kill the baby? That would be murder. Anything less than that would be manslaughter. We'll talk more about that down the road. This case is really, it's about that, don't get me wrong, but it's also like, what does the law say? A strict construction would actually be pretty simple because, what's in a pregnant woman? Well, it's not going to be a puppy. It's not going to be a cucumber. It clearly is a human life, a human being, as it were. And so the decision here by the court makes it, the dissent really gets at it and said, look, by allowing this man to kick this woman in the stomach, you've basically opened all pregnant women up to, if the husband doesn't like the baby or the boyfriend, all he's got to do is kick the woman in the stomach and kill the baby, and he's out from under all the pressure and child support and all that. And of course, that's a ridiculous way to be. And he says this is also mixed in with the politics of abortion, as you might imagine, looking for a way to justify killing a baby in the womb, a human being in the womb. And so the court finds for Mr. Keeler in this case, and keeps his punishment at basically assault against Mrs. Keeler, but no punishment for killing the baby. The legislature, noticing this huge hole in the law, actually, and there's in the notes following the case, they pass a law. They add the words "and fetus" to the penal code, so it's against the law to kill a human being or fetus or and fetus in the law because of the Keeler case. So in that case, they did a very broad construction, probably too narrow actually, construction to allow the killing of a fetus, by another human being. Anyway, so the practical outcome of that was to change the penal code. The last slide here, in re Banks, in re means in the matter of. So Banks has been convicted, and then how he's appealing his conviction, and it's called a prisoner petition. You can see the statute there on the slide. It's in the case book also. It says, any person who shall peep secretly into any room occupied by a female person shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. And the issue is the void for vagueness. Like, if you look at the statute, like literally what's against the law? Well, to look into a room. Well, any room, if I look into the window and there's a student studying in a classroom, is that peeping Tom? Peeping Tom, the phrase, as many of you know, has a kind of a sexual connotation, right? The story of Peeping Tom, and you can Google it or look it up in a fable or fairy tale book, is who looked upon Lady Godiva, who was riding through town on horseback, in a town in nude in a state of undress, covered with her hair, and I think it's to get a curse off a town or something like that. It's an old story from the Middle Ages. Anyway, so peeping Tom connotes voyeurism, sexual gratification, nakedness, nudity, and that's what Banks did. But his argument is, well, look at the statute there. Like, all it says is female person. It doesn't say anything about sexual gratification or naked or nude or genitalia or any of the language we would expect of in a statute like that. Anyway, so in this case, the term peeping Tom, the title of the statute, actually gives it the context that's needed. But if you read the opinion, when you read the opinion, the court sort of fleshes out that context and says, look, we're here, the legislature meant to outlaw voyeurism and looking at women in a state of undress without their consent, against their will. And so they enforced the statute, but then they also told the legislature, like, this needs to be fixed, right? This is vague. So as you notice with these cases, as you read, there is kind of a conversation oftentimes between the courts and the legislature, because the legislature writes these laws, and you don't really know how it's going to, work in the wild until you get it out there, and then police and courts start enforcing it, interpreting it. So sometimes you don't know that something's vague until you put it out there, and that's what these opinions sometimes help the legislature do. They actually watch and read these opinions to say, okay, how are our laws, or how are statutes working? Are they being, are they easy to interpret? Are they clear? Et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I'm going to post another video for chapter 4 right after this.